Sampling occurs when you take a portion of a larger group or population, look at the properties of the objects or mass that you have in your sample, this small portion of your group, and then make conclusions on your entire group based on what you see in your sample. So it's really important to make sure that your sample is actually representative of your entire group or population. Let's talk about how sampling is done in the food industry and how it should be done to make sure that we're accurately measuring the quality and number of defects in our food. The lecture outcomes for this video are to describe selection factors, the criteria for formation of lots, the criteria for sample selection, and the decisions concerning rejected lots. So how are lots and samples chosen for food products? We have a couple of guidelines for lots. They need to be homogeneous. What that means, if you take a look at this hamburger right here, this is an example of a relatively homogeneous lot. It's the same all the way through, top to bottom and left to right. So anywhere you can pull a sample out of this particular lot, you have a good chance of getting the same stuff in that sample as in the rest of the lot. If you have, let's say, a tray that contains turkey burger over here on the upper left, hamburger over here on the upper right, and then something else on the bottom, that's not very homogeneous, and you're going to get a different sample based on where you pull out of your lot. You also want a lot that's relatively big in relation to the sample you're pulling. This means that you're not testing the majority of your product every time you pull a sample. So you can inspect a smaller percentage total of a larger lot compared to a smaller lot. However, you do need to balance the size of your lot with other considerations. For example, going back to our hamburger, if this lot, let's say, is 10,000 pounds of hamburger, and I pull a sample on it, and I decide that based on that sample, that lot is okay. If my sample was wrong, then I end up having to recall 10,000 pounds of hamburger. Not the best day, but in terms of overall recall size, that's not a huge recall. If I decide that my lot is 1,000,000 pounds of hamburger and I pulled the same sample on it, then if my sample happens to give me false data about my entire lot, I have to recall 1,000,000 pounds of hamburger because I didn't test enough samples based on my lot size. So there's also the consideration that the bigger your lot gets, the more samples you need to take, that's one, but then the bigger your lot gets, the longer in time you run your process. So that means if something goes wrong, you need to go all the way back to the start of that lot and pull all of that defective material. You cannot sell it. So that's a consideration for lot size. How much product might you need to dispose of if something goes wrong in your lot? There's also guidelines for samples. Samples, as I said previously, need to be representative of your entire lot, and this is where lot homogeneity plays a role, but you also need to make sure that you're sampling properly to make sure that your sample that you're pulling is actually representative of your entire lot. Some differences can't really be fixed. Sometimes you're just going to have differences in different points in your lots. So this is where you want to have a good sampling procedure. And this is usually a randomly selected sample from various points in your lot. So you can do this through a random number generator where you assign random numbers to each piece or portion of your lot and pull randomly based on the random numbers that come up. You can have random serial numbers. So if you get in, let's say, bags of a raw ingredient that have serial numbers stamped on them, then you can randomly pick several of those serial numbers to go and pull from your shipment and inspect them. You can also do stratified sampling. And so what that is selecting parts of your sample from different areas of your lot. Let's take a look at this hamburger again. So if I was to do stratified sampling, I might pick a sample from up here in the upper right. I might pick a sample right here, more towards the middle of the tray, and I might pick a sample towards the lower left of the tray. That way I have a good sample across my tray, so if some kind of contamination happened at the bottom of my tray, I can pick it up right here with this portion of my sample. If the sample is on the upper portion of the tray, then I can pick it up with the upper right part of my sample. So that's what stratified sampling is looking at all the places where you could have something come in, all the different levels and stacks of your products, and make sure you're not just scooping off of the top of your sample or off of the closest part of the sample to you. You're digging all the way into your lot and you're pulling out product from various points. I want to point out right now that this type of sampling is good when you have a large lot of product sitting in front of you. For example, when you get a shipment of raw ingredient, you want to do this type of sampling to make sure that the raw ingredient is the same quality all the way through. So if you have a large super sack, about 2,000 pounds or so of flour, you want to make sure you're digging all the way down to the bottom of that super sack to make sure the flour on the bottom is just as good as the flour on the top. You want to measure points in the middle, you want to measure points in the left and the right to make sure that you have a good quality product in the entire sack, not just on the top of it. However, if you're talking about product that you're producing, so maybe bags of cookies using that flour, you don't want to necessarily wait until you have an entire pallet full of cookies to start checking your cookies. You want to check that every 30 minutes to hour as it's coming off of your process. So lot-based sampling is really good for when you have the product already in front of you and you need to make a judgment call on, is all of this product good or is all of it bad? If you have a different case, then you may want to look at not using lots necessarily, but a different type of sampling procedure. So it's great when lots are acceptable, our quality is good, it meets our standards, we can use that product. But what do we do when the lots are not accepted? When we decide there's too much defective product in here, there's too many problems, I can't use this product? Well, what you do depends on why the lot was rejected. In certain cases, you may be able to pick out the acceptable product from the non-acceptable product. Maybe you rejected a shipment of dried beans because there was too many sticks in it. Well, you could go through and sit there and pick out all the sticks, but that's very time consuming and labor intensive, and you probably don't want to do that. Sometimes you can rework or reprocess your non-conforming material. You can send it off back to the ingredient supplier to be reprocessed. If it's your own product, you may be able to put it in the product as rework. The problem with that is you're only allowed a certain amount of rework per amount of new product you put out. So you may not be able to do that if you have a very large lot of non-conforming product. Both of these are assuming that the non-conforming issue or the defect, whatever it was, is not some kind of health hazard. It's not something that's going to be preventative of your product being sold. It's not microbial contamination. It may be that you just made cookies that came out with too few chocolate chips. But if you made cookies that got contaminated with salmonella because the eggs you put in were contaminated, you can't rework that product. It's got salmonella in it. You're not allowed to do that. Then, in that case, you have to destroy it. So you have to destroy a lot if you've got some kind of contamination, microbial, physical, or chemical. You cannot sell that product. You have to destroy it somehow. You may have an off flavor or texture or taste that can't necessarily be fixed by reprocessing. Or you might have some kind of spoilage from contamination or from a chemical reaction that you were not expecting occurring in your process. Or you might have some kind of damage present that just can't be fixed, like overly bruised fruit. You can't necessarily sell that and have it be acceptable to the consumer. So in those cases, you may need to just actually get rid of that lot and not do anything with it at all. But whether you decide to accept or reject your lot, that depends on your sampling. So you need to ensure that you're confident that the sample you've pulled is representative of your lot, so you're making the correct decision to either say, yes, this product is good, or no, it's not good, I need to discard the product or fix it somehow that it is acceptable.